13 Questions by Man Transcending. Manhood in the Digital Age.
We'll do Robert's next then, right?
Do we have three to do?
Well, we would have three if we're going to do Zach's, but since I asked him to come back on to get those bonus
Oh, yeah,
questions
that's fine.
in,
So you mean we're just doing the second one? Because we already did
Right.
Brandon's. We're doing, okay.
right, yeah, I was just trying to get my...
Yeah, I thought you were saying we're doing a third. I'm like, wait, which one? Who else do I need to research real quick? I have terrible memory when it comes to like associating things, especially when I've like done editing. So I've got like my mind in the one that I edited yesterday, and so it's like now I got to think back to somebody else, and I edited another one the week before, so it's like I hear it once and then I listen to it again, and then I talk to somebody else, and they're people that I don't like. All these I've been going blind into pretty much, right? I don't mind doing that because I kind of like it with the questions that, unless there's some, like the only thing I've kind of, dropped is I just asked, what got your friend into, chiropractic, because that interests me, because I've seen this correlation of like personal, like I got into it because something happened to me or a personal experience of somebody close to me. It was always like, it's not like, oh, well, I wanted to be a chiropractor.
Right. Yeah, there was some event that led them down that path.
Exactly. It's not even like podiatry or something where you're like, well, there's good money in working on feet.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, man. I was thinking about like the life of a chiropractor and just having to deal with the public and like, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, especially since the foundings of the company are crazy.
Yeah.
But I just like this idea, and we've talked about the roadmaps of reality. How you describe what's going on behind the scenes is just a story. So if all this stuff that he created for treating the body and how it's linked together is the wrong story, but if I pull this knob and you still get a reaction over here, it doesn't matter that the story's crazy. You still have the same reaction, the same outcome. And
results.
Yeah, well, I've also thought about it too. I love the idea of trickster. Trickster fascinates me because in society, I forget where I heard it, and I don't know if it's a true story, but it was like this guy went in to debunk these people that were doing these, like, where they'd pull like chicken gizzards or what looked like, guts out of your body to get rid of cancer.
Right.
And so he infiltrated this group and found out that, wow, they were actually really curing cancer. But he also found out that they were really doing trickery. They weren't really taking anything out, but that belief was facilitating the healing within the person. So then you get into the conundrum of you need the belief, and the belief is led by the lie. And I think of all reality kind of on this line of that's really where the magic, the creation, the forward, there's something in between on this very trickstery aspect. That's the aspect that interacts with us, the other, the unknown, the paranormal, the weird, it's something that throws, a wrench into the works and makes us think differently. I don't know what it is, but I'm fascinated by that.
It's very mercurial.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about recently too, is just the god of Mercury, because I don't know, this was like years ago maybe, I was looking up the etymology of my last name, and all I could really get, it's just like a suffix that's added into a bunch of German names, so it really doesn't have any meaning, but the strut part, from what I could tell, ties back to I don't want to say trickery, but just stuff that the god of Mercury would generally look over, because Mercury is supposed to be, kind of a trickster guy. So,
well, God of War, right? So, you win through tactics.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also made me think of Loki a little bit too, but I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, this is a good conversation. Do you want to roll this into the intro? Find a good place to clip it in?
Are you recording?
I am. I have been.
I mean, sure. Yeah. I mean, I can.
Listen, I don't record without permission, but I thought between we were like in between, I was just starting my second one.
Yeah. No. Yeah. We can use that. No problem.
Sweet. So, man, I really enjoyed this one. This was a fun interview, and since I don't know if we mentioned it before, but with with Robert Johnson. This one, I felt almost like I was doing a personal podcast because we, especially in the bonus section, we went off into the intellectual weeds. It was so much fun. I think everybody's going to enjoy it, but we definitely take a stray off the path of the questions. It's a very long interview in thoroughly. This is one of those ones that in a perfect world of situations might have turned into a documentary series. I don't know. Just a really long episode. Would have been like the Dune of the 13 questions. Director's cut.
Yeah, Robert definitely came with a lot of knowledge, and that's to be expected because he is the host of a Masonic education podcast called Whence Came You, which is how I, reached out to him because, he obviously I listened and thought he would make a good guest. And, since we're both part of the same fraternity, of course it was, a go from the start. So yeah, it was really fun to have him on. And yeah, it could have gone on for, much longer than.
Well, and especially if you're one of his listeners and you're just joining us on by following him, we definitely go into topics that are generally not approached on the show. It's one of the things I love about this show is I don't try to lock it in boxes. I always allow, if I find something interesting and the guest has the time and seems willing, I want to go down those beaten paths. I want to expand. I'm already here. I want to find the knowledge. If I see something off, the beaten path, I'm going to go look at that cool looking rose. I want to find out about it. We got into all the really interesting aspects of consciousness, prismatic realities being reflected onto, creating what is actually happening down here. Just really interesting thoughts and views and ways of looking at consciousness. So had a huge amount of fun editing this one. I'm losing my words because I keep thinking about the episode in my head. So you guys are going to enjoy this one. If you don't, write us at 13questionspodcast@gmail.com. You can send the complaints right to me and tell us what we should do better. Send us questions. Really, if you know somebody you want to have on the show, let us know. Or, send that info in through the Discord chats. And if for some reason, technology-wise or for ideology reasons, you're not going into the Discord or can't, that's fine. This isn't an exclusive club. Send us an email and we'll make sure that we get you the links over to the full episodes.
So feel free to tell us everything that you think we did wrong. Email us at 13questionspodcast@gmail.com. We also welcome content suggestions, like new questions to throw into the mix. And if you guys would like to do your own recording of somebody that you feel has valuable information that would be helpful if shared amongst others in the listening community, please go out and find that person, sit down with them, ask them the questions, do the recording, send it up to us, and we can release it as an episode. That way, everybody that's listening can partake in that group of knowledge that you have decided is worth memorializing.
What's the worst that can happen? Somebody says no, right? Or maybe you think they say yes. You do the interview and you think it's terrible, it can't be aired. Maybe something happens with the audio. You forgot to hit the recorder. You still get to have a conversation, an in-depth conversation with another human being. So do it, share it, let other people share in that experience. If you've enjoyed these conversations here, then you can add to that pool of knowledge. Or send us your people our way.
And if you don't feel like emailing us, you can always use the Discord chat to at us or to interact with other listeners that are hanging out there. There is a few that have started to become a little bit more active. It's not quite as busy as the Grammarica server, but it's still a fun place to be.
Absolutely. And there's plenty of things going on, nature postings, things that are just feel good and outside, people talking and sharing about their keto diets and meals. You definitely ate way too much fast food, Bill. You make me feel bad every time I glance in that segment of the chat room, but it's a wonderful place. So yeah, hang out there and at me, talk to me at me. I've been very busy with editing, so I haven't been spending the time and glancing through like I should, but I am an open book and always accessible and certainly not hiding. I'm a rogue in D&D, so maybe it's my nature.
And so that plus it's free. Discord is free. You don't have to pay for anything. Kind of like this show. It's value for value. We don't ask anything from you except whatever you feel is appropriate in your heart. If you want to support a project like this, you can show it monetarily through a one-time donation, which we are still setting up on the website, I believe.
Yes, we are. Listen, we're just two guys who figured out how to learn WordPress, and we got to make some buttons and get things customized to make sure that it's going to play friendly for you. But you can support the show by heading over to 13questionspodcast.com and, or, going over to the Discord links and saying hi, putting us in contact with somebody, coming up with some amazing questions. Sit down, relax, grab a drink, grab a smoke, do whatever you got to do to get yourself into a mind state of what questions do I want to hear that can let me see an aspect of reality or an angle that other people have exploited that I need to know how they're going to mine that vein, right? Like I'm kind of looking at the person like they've got little aspects of reality figured out. They've got their little mine dug out. They've got their income coming in. I want to go, okay, how do I ask that question that lets me see that? And that's what 13 questions are for me. So figure out that question, send it to us, and we can improve the show. There's so many things that you can do. Hang out in the chats. Support the show monetarily, help support our website costs, our Libsyn hosting costs, equipment costs, all the things that go along. Our time is free. It's given to you by Bill and myself. We believe in this project. We've said it before. We're not beholden to it. It's why we want to get as many angles and views and people involved as possible. So we thank you.
And speaking of being thankful, we're going to roll into the gratitude segment. Still working on a jingle for that, but hopefully that'll change in the near future. So me personally, I'm thankful for just this gratitude segment in general, because earlier today I was kind of feeling mopey about myself, and I knew I had to do these intros, so it forced me to adapt a different mindset into thinking of like, what am I thankful for? And which is the exact opposite side of the spectrum of what I was hanging out in, being, down, mopey and depressed, and, the weather's gray outside and all this stuff. So really just thinking about things to be grateful for really helped to kind of turn my, my line of thinking and reasoning around a little bit. It wasn't, my ego was kind of kicking and screaming as I was doing this, because it liked to sit there and feel sorry for myself. But doing the mental exercise of thinking about things that you're grateful for kind of, changed whatever weird brain chemistry was going on up there at the time. And it helped. It made things a little bit better, guys. So if you're not doing this on, a daily consistent basis, then hopefully, when you hear this, you think of something that you're grateful for. And, if you only hear this once a week and it's the only time that pops in your head, just take a second and be thankful for something. Doesn't matter what it is, it helps.
I completely agree. And, I wasn't sure. There's so many things to be grateful for, but I hadn't really, dialed down on what I was going to say. But you made me think of something I haven't thought of in a while. And it's just understanding human behavior and neurolinguistics, having access to that knowledge. It's so powerful when, when I was a teen being depressed, understanding that, hey, depressed people always stare down at the ground. Not always, but, it's a characteristic, staring down at the ground, not making eye contact. Okay, so don't do that, right? Force yourself to look up. Going into broadcasting school and finding out that one of the things that you do if you want to sound like you're happy on the radio, put on a smile, put on a fake smile. But you also find out that when you put on a fake smile, you do that for a few minutes and you start to feel better. So there's this weird connection where you can force your physical to change and then you can get an emotional response. It's not just a one-way causality. You have a control over this. And then, learning human behavior through interrogation training and understanding that we are machines and that there's this programming and people justify things and rationalize and just having access to that information is so powerful on the human condition and as we operate as a human. And there's so many people out there that don't have that. I think of my it's not my favorite, it bugs me, but you look at like Mercedes on the inside of the cars and different vehicles, they say, don't forget your keys. Okay, so everybody's going to forget their keys. Your brain's not reading and associating the words in the same order. It's seeing so you need to say something like remember your keys. So now it's remember keys. That's it. And so, I see these things permeated out in society, and it seems like a subtle way, but I go, man, if you're designing a vehicle and your intent is to keep people from doing that, don't do something that's going to do the opposite. I saw it in the safety industry when I was in retail. We were focusing on accidents and injuries and accidents and, injuries, and we're saying accidents and injuries. So of course, what's happening? Our profits and loss are skyrocketing. We're having more accidents and injuries. We are literally, even if just through neurolinguistics, we're putting people in that mind state instead of, safety first. And so it's, I'm very grateful to have that understanding now in my life because it certainly affects how I interface with people and the words I use. Something we've talked about a lot on this podcast in recent episodes.
Yeah, it's a neat little trick, you could say. We were talking about that a little bit before. Mm-hmm. But speaking of tricks, you were saying to sound happy on radio, you fake a smile. I also heard another interesting tidbit of how to trick your body into releasing those endorphins, like when you smile, is to hold a pen or a pencil in your mouth for like 10 seconds because that forces the muscles in your mouth to, same ones are being used to smile as to hold the pen. So that's another trick you can use if you're feeling pouty or whatever. Just grab a pen or a pencil.
No, that's a great little tip, man. I've never heard that one. I like that.
Yeah, and you want to hold the pencil, from end to end on either side of your mouth, not eraser down your throat and point outwards.
I was listening to this podcast and they said that I should stick the pencil down my throat.
That won't make you happy. Sorry, guys.
That's great. Well, yeah, this was a amazing episode. Had a lot of fun. We went into the weeds. I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly did. And yeah, I'm glad that you were there to join me on that ride, Bill. It was a wonderful ride.
Yeah, it was an awesome interview. Check out Whence Came You, check out our Discord chat, and check out this interview.
That's right. And share this with your friends. Let everybody know. We're sharing knowledge here. We're helping people grow. And we certainly should not be selfish about that. All right, Robert, welcome to 13 Questions. It's nice to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question number 1. What was the best advice ever given to you? And would you modify it at all today?
That's an interesting question. I grew up in, I don't know, I'm like the first year millennial, so like 1981.
Mm.
And
Not quite a millennial. You're in that oddball, like
I
3,
don't
4
know.
year
It's
section.
it's Pew Research, but yeah, I know. Like it's on the cusp. I'm almost Gen X, and what's interesting is like I grew up in a house where my mom and dad separated early, so I didn't get like fatherly advice. You know, I got like advice from my grandpa. It was like, "Don't do that, you'll die." Right. And so when I think about like meaningful advice, people always tend to think like, "Oh, what's the best advice you ever got?" And I hear these stories from people, and they say things like these really cool holistic stories. Something that would sound like a Chinese proverb, that just like resonates intrinsically with a person. But I never really got that from really anybody. I got practical advice. Think twice, literally. I think about holistic advice, and I think the best advice I ever got was probably off of a notebook that I picked up once. It had like writing prompts on the back, and it said, "The man who makes no mistakes makes nothing." And I thought, yeah, that's pretty legit. And maybe that's the best advice I ever got. Something I read on the back of a notebook, as sad as that is.
Or it's just, the world reveals itself through, the oddest places in strangely specific ways for you.
I will take that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna just throw in there the man that makes no mistakes makes nothing. I mean, yeah, you've learn from your mistakes. I think that's pretty valuable advice.
It's been the advice of several 100,000 people, I'm sure, over the span of years. You said in different ways. It's if you don't go for it, it's never going to happen. I don't know. It feels like everybody says, the man who has all this success has failed. The difference between a success and a failure is something like the success has failed, 100 times, where the failure refused to even try, or something along those lines. But it's good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I always bring it up, and I think of it like the iPhone. If you're in the 1900s and you're imagining like an iPhone, well, you're never going to get there in your lifetime. But if you don't have that vision of where to go, then you're never going to make all the necessary steps and the advancements along the way. Even if you don't see that end product, you're not a failure. You still it's not what you thought the end post was.
That's right. That's right.
What was the most?
And plus,
sorry.
I was just going to say, plus, making mistakes builds character too, because there's another question that comes up later, but about talking to your past self, and I don't know, dance around that, because if you're going to tell your past self something, that's going to maybe prevent something, a lesson being learned. So
yeah, they're my kids. I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and a daughter, who's the youngest. And they got the kids got a new principal a couple of years ago, and we weren't super excited about that at first. And I remember one of the talks he gave to the kids, and he said, "You have to have grit." He was real big on this idea, and this grit wasn't like, be a tough guy or whatever. It was be able to learn from your mistakes and be able to pick yourself up and learn from those things and move forward. Don't get so hung up on the fact that you didn't win. You played. Life is for the people who take action. Get out there and get to work and do the things and experience all the experiences. Have the grit. Have the, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
I agree. It's good advice. Yeah, if you failed the first time in everything, you you only get one try.
Yeah, what is that? Where would we ever beat Mario Brothers? Would we ever?
Oh my God!
Without
warp zones, never have. It's still a holy grail.
For sure.
What was the most important lesson you learned from your parents?
Well, So my mom, I think it's definitely respect from for my counterpart. You know, um, regardless of who you are or who you're with, I think respect for the counterpart. So your husband or your wife, um, or your girlfriend or boyfriend, you know, whatever the case is, having the respect for them and acknowledging them as a supportive role in everything that you do is one aspect, but also being a champion for them also. Um, it's a real two-way street, and I think if you champion each other, it really works out. So, for my mom, it's definitely respect for my counterpart. You know, my biological father, it's probably um, don't 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 be a drunk, because my dad was a super drunk. Um, I remember, you know, great gifts from my dad were like dollar store markers and Crown Royal bags filled with marbles. Um, so don't be a drunk is probably the lesson from my dad that I learned holistically. My stepdad was real interesting. He was a military man, and I think I learned a lot about action and duty from him. And what I mean is that in everything we do, uh, there's a sense of duty that you have to, you know, if you widen the scope on your viewpoint of the world and you look at how you impact everybody, taking recognizing your duty to other people and then taking action regardless of the consequence on yourself, is like a selfless act, but at the same time it it promotes the welfare of your direct circles and your community. And so I think having that advice from him, and of course he didn't say this in such a way, you know, he didn't talk about action and duty. It was more like, um, if you lied, tell the truth. If you know that, with the old, you know, euphemism of kicking the can down the road, my dad would say, no, pick the can up, because it's the right thing to do now, even though it's harder right now. Somebody else doesn't have to do that, and they can focus on the next big thing and build the next best thing because they're not worried about cleaning up your mess. So that's probably the best advice.
That is amazing advice. I wish I'd gotten advice like that when I was a kid, because I had to learn the flip side through the regret of not stepping in to help others, and then having the guilt of that, and then going, well, now my motivation is I can never let that happen. So that's my fuel.
Yeah, I get that. I get the same kinds of regrets also. You know, my mom is a Roman Catholic Italian woman, and it's, you know, if I could tell her the coolest thing I did, and I get, you know, the critique about it. Only now in my late 30s is my mom said, "Oh, good job with that." But always, it was always like, "Oh, you should have done this, you should have done that." And it's like, well, thanks, mom. I really appreciate the hindsight that you have. You're so amazing, you know. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the guilt that drives us all, I think, to a point, is like, it can be a silent killer too,
It
right?
can.
Like, if you're thinking about everything that you want to do in your day-to-day life, and you know that you recognize you have choices, you can do the right thing, you can do the wrong thing, and I don't know if your brain puts these puts these stickers on things, right and wrong, but it kind of does. But we find a way in our brains to not think about the labels that we put on them, so that we don't have to like acknowledge the guilt that we have. And uh, so I'm the same way, Adam. I feel like I constantly am thinking, I want to be my best friend tomorrow. And even if that doesn't mean like, you know, filling up the water on my coffee machine, right? Like when I'm going to run late tomorrow, so I'm going to do it tonight. But also psychologically, I'm going to do the right thing now, because I don't want to think about how, you know, what a piece of garbage I was tomorrow or something.
You know, I think of Jordan Peterson. He talks back to Homer something about like he's eating something and somebody says to him like, "Hey, aren't you worried that's going to like upset your stomach?" "Oh, I'm not worried about that. That's a different guy." And I do think about that, and
Yeah.
it runs into me all the time. I try to take like great lessons from the universe, and it's tying my shoes. Sports shoes, can't put them on when the laces are tied, but I can slip them off easy. So if I'm lazy, I'm coming home from work, I slip them off. I'm rushing in the morning, an extra 2 minutes matters. Well, now when I'm sitting there having to tie my shoes, I'm like, well, it was so easy for me to have just done it back then when the time wasn't as, compressed. And so it's like every time that happens, I have to like kick myself in the ass and go, all right, that's a big lesson. Because nobody tells me that and it teaches me, but like I have to focus on my fault.
That's right. Yeah, you got it, man. I mean, just untying your shoes is a great example. I mean, it's the same for me. It was the same thing. I'm talking about filling up the coffee maker. I'm telling my kids, put your shoes where you will remember they're going to be, right? How many times have I can't find my shoes. I can't find my wallet. Significant other, mom, dad. Well, where were you when you left them? Gee whiz, mom, dad, whoever. If I knew that, I knew where the gosh darn shoes are now. And yeah, I mean, be your best friend, do yourself favors, take care of yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. What book has been most influential on your life and why? And it's okay if it's not just one book. I mean, obviously, it's not a list.
That's a hefty question because I think a lot of people might automatically go to some holy book or something that has some sort of uh, philosophical value. And I mean, I guess I'm no different. Like, I think I would have two books, three probably. I think the first book I ever read where I really found some sort of philosophy was a Masonic book, a book written by a Freemason, I think back in 1904. His name was Milton A. Pottinger, and he wrote this book called Symbolism, a treatise on the soul of things. It's a really wild book, but I think the entire book in itself is probably not terribly important for the average person to read. I think that the best part of the book is like chapter 1. It's this narrative of his life in the frontier kind of years of Illinois, and he meets like this. Best I could say is like an apparition of a being who tells him like the secrets of the universe, and it's this really interesting, back and forth. Again, just the narrative in that book I think is really powerful for me. Why I think it made me think about the idea of something that um, would not be as strange, maybe to Bill. We have this saying, numberless worlds surround us, all framed by the same divine artificer. This idea, whether that divine artificer is uh, the David Boehm's like infinite potential, or nature, or whatever have you. Um, there's like a purpose and a system behind reality, and so that was important. And then a book that took that further probably was a book by a guy named George Plumer, who wrote a book called The Master's Word. It's another Masonic book. But what I liked about that book was he really took this objective look at world religions and systems. And in the mid 20th century, when America was this budding land of the free and this almost, I'm hesitant to say it, but like this Christian idealized nation. And we've got, rose colored glasses today about the past, but he takes no punches. I mean, he kind of says it's the same in all of these religions, and nobody's really more special or called upon to be, the one true people of a god or something. It's the same thing. It's an avatar. It's an idea. It's a perfection. It's this idea of taking divine attributes of a creative force and applying, the perfect divine attributes of a creative force and applying them to the person that you are, so that you can be a better person, a better creator, or whatever. And then I guess the last one is probably a religious text, right? Like, is the Bhagavad Gita is really special to me. I think mostly because it relates to a lot of the ideas about action and duty, and internal conflict resolution. Yeah, that would be it.
Love that. Yeah, that book has managed to find itself in the annals of history so many times as being a relevant, has ideas that continue to hold high relevance.
That's right. It's the book itself. I mean, for the person who picks it up and begins to read it, is this, somebody would think about it like a biblical narrative of a character, Arjuna, and a charioteer, and a war that's happening between two factions and royal families and whatnot. And then by the the last maybe 2/3 of the book, you start to have this. He has this, Arjuna, the main character, has this revelation about his charioteer, who is Krishna, and he shows him, this divine revelation of all things and what everything is encompassing of. He shows him the multitude of worlds, that he's the destroyer of worlds, he's eating planets and galaxies, while at the same time he's this bright, shining, creative force. And there's this idea of absolute truth. It's just a wild concept. It's like we live in the meat suit that experiences reality through a biological filter, and there's so much that we don't know, or there's so much we can't experience because of what we're in. I mean, infrared light, for instance. I don't know about you guys, but I used to shoot old film, and I would shoot infrared film, and on old film cameras, if you were lucky, there would be a little red dot, so you would focus, and if you were shooting infrared, you'd give a little red dot a turn, and it would go out of focus a little bit, because the infrared image is now in focus, even though it's out of focus for you, because in the infrared spectrum, it's closer. So it's like, we don't, what is the reality? What are we not seeing? What are we not experiencing? And so these texts, these biblical, almost, I don't want to call them biblical, they're not biblical, but these religious philosophical texts of old seem to know something, or reveal some sort of hidden philosophy that even mathematics today is starting to, wipe away the dust on, if you will.
Well, one of the things I love about those old texts, and especially where science is going, and you kind of mentioned it, if you don't know what's going on, you don't know radiation, you don't know microwaves, you don't know infrared, you don't know gamma rays, you don't know gravity waves. Like, we keep peeling back these deeper layers. Well, how far does that go? And, I love that science is starting to come up where it gets wishy-washy over time. Cause and effect, things in the future affecting, experiments in the past. And when I start thinking of that, then truth becomes important to me, because, well, truth is, maybe things are connected in a way that we don't understand, where these ancient people could have access to the same deep knowledge that I have access to, because I am in that reality, and it is connected in a way that the ancient texts tell you it is, but that our modern mind just doesn't seem to interface well with.
There's a lot to unpack there with what you said, and I don't think any of it is not true. I think almost everything you said there, if not everything you said, is plausible. We have just ideas like Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, this is everybody seems to think about Schrodinger as like maybe a psychological thing or something. This is a physicist. Guys like Niels Bohr, guys like David Bohm. These guys were hardcore physicists that uncovered things about the nature of reality that arguably maybe have made them a little off their rocker. Depression for sure in the case of guys like David Bohm, but they uncover ideas of the nature of reality, and they really do start to think about things like the um, infinite potential, or what they call 0 point, or in New Age circles, quote unquote, you might hear words like Akashic record, or the idea of absolute truth. Being able to completely step outside your consciousness and realize the idea of all is one. There's a singular consciousness that everybody's kind of tapped into and we're experiencing, and then in an endless feedback loop that's generating reality as we experience it. I mean, this is all physics, but we tend to think about it like it's science fiction, and it's kind of a shame.
Yeah, it's crazy because that's literally what it is. When you really start, to me, the science points all directions at the ancient texts, the ancient writings, and you can go back to the Dogon or, to ancient Hinduism. There seems to be all these intertwined connections to it. So yeah, it's beautiful to see, mainstream science is dragging its butt begrudgingly, to this middle post point.
It's hard for them. I mean, we have to understand that this is not the fault of, like, I hate using the word mainstream science, but I use it a lot, because I feel like the second I say that, instantaneously there are a million people who go, this guy is one of those guys. It's like, no, I'm a mainstream science person. But I also recognize that guys like Charles Hapgood had ideas a long time ago that science is saying, oh yeah, this is legit, or people are starting to realize things that Niels Bohr, or again David Bohm, who proposed things in the 1970s, or even in the 60s. It's a famous story about Robert Oppenheimer, the father, quote unquote, of the atomic bomb. He took David Bohm under his wing to get his degree, and David Bohm couldn't get a security clearance because he paid money to be a part of the Communist Party in the early days so that he could get connected to Russian physicists. He thought maybe if he got in contact with the Communist Party, he could, chit chat about physics. But he quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. But the strike was already made, so he couldn't get a security clearance. So Robert Oppenheimer met with him anyway, and they worked behind the scenes to develop the atomic bomb. But later on, when all the dust settles, no pun intended, David Bohm basically says, he comes over and he starts talking to Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer says, "You got to leave the United States. You can't be here anymore." He says, "Well, why can't I be here anymore?" He says, "Because you were, this whole thing with the Communist Party, McCarthyism, yada yada. He's got to leave." And he goes down to Sao Paulo, Brazil. David Bohm goes down to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and starts teaching down there. And when he goes down there and he starts teaching, he develops this theory about the kind of invisible hand. And when he does this, he publishes this paper to the academic community, and Oppenheimer says he totally ignores it. And when a student of Oppenheimer comes up and he says, "Hey, what are we going to do about this paper that David Bohm wrote?" So Oppenheimer calls together all the great minds, and they all meet together. And Oppenheimer says, "Prove David Bohm wrong, or we ignore him." So the entire scientific community ignores David Bohm, and David doesn't understand this or know about it because he's in Sao Paulo. And the point that I'm making is mainstream science, and this point is Oppenheimer, and your fringe guy is David Bowen, and he's making legit complaints, and he's writing these theories down, and he's making sense, and all of the students are going, I can't prove what he's saying wrong. And Oppenheimer says, then ignore it. Because if you can't prove it wrong, you need to ignore it because it opens too many doors or what have you. Or maybe it's just because he paid money to the Communist Party during that era. But I mean, mainstream science does this all the time. They ignore when they can't prove something wrong. It's like the logical fallacy of burden of proof, but they kind of flip-flop it. It's sad.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things you mentioned before that I've been thinking about is the idea that, religions, itself isn't an intrinsic truth. It's just a reflection of the world. Each one is almost like a roadmap of what actually is. And there's no argument. The ideologies and that stuff is something outside of that. And science is the same way, that even if you don't agree with it, even if it strikes against the body of what is, it doesn't change what it is. So ignoring him because you can't disprove him, that to me puts you as a religious organization that is off track. Like, I can't see a difference. That's a very good connection.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It hinders a lot of free thinking these days, which is a bummer, we can't really move forward with these roadblocks.
What daily habits or rituals do you have?
I think daily, daily habits are probably things like, I'm pretty religious with a checklist. So I have like a ad hoc checklist, but I have a daily one also. Things like read a chapter of the current book I'm reading, do this, make sure I vacuum, make sure I do this, right? And these things have become increasingly important during an era where I'm working from home during a COVID-19 pandemic. And I think I do them not to drive meaning or whatever. There's probably some psychological reason why I've chosen to organize a certain set of things to do to occupy my mind. And I think maybe to an extent, that's what I keep a daily ritual for, or a habit for. You said a ritual, and that's really interesting to me. I think probably the only ritual I have, some people have a ritual way of doing things. One of my good friends, Dago, has he smokes a pipe, and it's a ritual for him, right? Like, he takes it out, he wipes it down, he selects the particular tobacco that he wants, he packs his pipe a certain way, and so it's a ritual. Everything has its place. A velvet bag for the pipe, everything's treated with respect. This idea. And I think if I had the same thing, it's probably no different than maybe 95% of Americans, and it's coffee. For me, I grew up in an Italian American household, so I was drinking espresso and table wine when I was like 8, which is probably why I'm short. But I think good coffee and taking time with it is especially interesting. Finding the right cup, measuring sugar. I don't know. When's the last time you measured the amount of sugar you put in your coffee? I mean, I don't think I ever used to do that when I was young. I would just dump sugar in, and then I would, brew coffee. And today it's exactly 1 tablespoon of sugar, and it's this particular coffee, and it's these particular cups. They have to be glass. They have to do this, and I have to know this about the coffee. And I'm really into the sustainability aspect of the coffee, and it's just really bizarre. So probably coffee.
No, that's the same answer that Micah Hanks gave. And it made a sense because he even mentioned like just sitting there staring into it. And it made me think of, the old thing of like staring into a mirror in the dark. to elicit, these mental states. And I was like, well, I could see that. You have a feeling, you have a smell, you have the warmth, you have this vision. Like, there are all these things that can become something that is a deeply spiritual engagement with just reality by, it's really a focus. It's finding a way to focus your mind in that moment.
And what's interesting too is use this idea of ritual. Some of our oldest rituals in recorded history stem from, say, like the mysteries. And even then, are the ritual of the mysteries. Alexander the Great said, anybody who's experienced the mysteries, right? The idea of, whether that's Dionysius or Eleusis or whatever, there was an element of a psychoactive drug in the ritual. And I mean, coffee is the #1 best-selling psychoactive drug in the world, caffeine. And so, I mean, yeah, there's a ritual. It's when, maybe we could say this, back in the day, the drug enhanced the ritual. Today, the drug is the ritual.
Yeah. And, this is another one of those weird things that, you go to indigenous people, you look at the things that they're taking and ingesting and how they're using it. It's not just, take a drug and get messed up. It's, use it as part of a ritual. Like, if you look at ayahuasca, while they're doing the ceremony, they'll have somebody beating drums and chanting, and they change the drum beats and they change the chants because these are people who have been in that state a long time. And they know the feelings and the visuals that this creates and the changes. And this is being used to, treat people with drug addiction. And it gets even weirder because these people re-experience events and it's traumatic, but then it somehow resets the neuroreceptors in their brain. And this starts to get to these ideas that, is it possible that being put into this mindset facilitates all these other things? And it's really cool because, religion, we have natural, chemical dumps. We create a lot of these natural, psychoactives in our system. And you find that when people are having religious experiences, or at least as defined in laboratories, that you get, detections in, these compounds in people's bodies. And so it's just beautiful to kind of see this merriment, because to me, it's true nature. If you have an experience that's natural and connected to a real event, and then you have, a connection with the plant, like it's weird. Science is finally starting to at least make these therapeutic connections for, like nerve regrowth and neuroregenesis. And you go, well, nothing's supposed to regrow the brain.
But here we are. This is the, what did Steve Jobs, he said he took LSD. There's a lot of people who take LSD. And the thing is that it rewires a connection. If in psychology 101, they would say red, and they teach you, almost everybody goes apple, right? But what if you took LSD and it shakes up the connections, and somebody says red, and you say speakers? Now you think different. And so the point I guess you could make, here's a thought experiment, right? Is like, if Schrodinger's cat is real, which it is according to the double slit experiment, you don't know it until you see it. And then when you see it, you reinforce it. And then reality says, yep. So here's a classic example. In the Bible, people live like hundreds of years. Adam lives like 950 years. Maybe, let's take the Bible out of it. Let's just say, what if a dude who finally discovered death lived to 950, and then each successive generation lives a little bit shorter because they're starting to solidify the idea of death until there's an equilibrium of thought about how long a person should live and how long they shouldn't live. And somehow we're around, 87 years old or something. Like, what if that's real? Like, what if
people go, well, that's crazy. Well, you go look at the 8-minute mile. It wasn't broken for, how many decades. And then all of a sudden one guy does it, the next year it gets blown out of the water, and that continues.
That's right.
Well,
and so with that same thread though, you've got, a brain regrowth and people who are erasing trauma through the use of drugs. And I say drugs, I don't mean, like cocaine and all this stuff, but like therapeutic uses of LSD or dimethyltryptamine or whatever have you. It's rewiring the way some things are thought about, rewiring the way people are perceiving reality. And if that's the case, then it's rewiring the way their reality really is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's changing a whole viewpoint, changing everything.
Depending on your view of God in the universe, you have this thing coming from the ground. It's growing. When people take it or eat it, they think they see God. They have religious experiences. If you look at the Stanford experiences, decades later, people still label as being one of the most positive experiences in their life that's continued to have benefit. Well, is this part of reality interfacing with us? We don't have a connect. Like, I kind of look at it like the internet. We're all connected to the internet, but I'm on a Mac, you're on a PC. I might be watching through Hulu, you through Netflix. And we're never really seeing the code in the background. I'm only seeing my bank numbers showing up, not, the digital information getting transferred behind. And it's just one of those things. I kind of think that's what we're missing.
That's totally legit. I mean, there was a famous, it's like a wood carving plate. I'm trying to think about, they don't know who made it, but basically it's a guy and he's peering beyond this dome of reality, right? And then he sees the spinning mechanical wheels in the heavens. And today we see that, it's like Alice and she's peeking behind the curtain. It's the Matrix code. What if that's the thing is when you take a drug or something like that, you sort of pull back outside of your normal human experience, or maybe you're overloading the filters, or maybe you're taking the filters off somehow. The brain does all these things for us. Then you start to get into some wild realms. Like, what if, schizophrenia is not necessarily what it really is clinically? What if there's some reality to that? What if they're just experiencing more through the filter? What if the filter mechanisms are broken in the brain or something? Like, who knows? But I mean, kind of going back to what you were talking about with therapies and things, I'm loving the fact now that it's becoming more mainstream to allow people to experiment with, I will say, just mind-altering substances, even in controlled ways, that are assisting people in making the quality of their life better.
It's a beautiful thing. We're finally moving in that direction. If I were to ask your best friend, what is the one thing they would say you need to work on the most and why?
Well, when I first think about that question, I'm thinking like my best friend Scott would probably tell me that I get hung up on stuff, like if and I'll feel bad about something I did for a really long time, or I'll hold a grudge against somebody else for something that they did, even though it's like they're oblivious to the fact that they did something. Or maybe I have a big mouth. I think if I asked my wife, she would probably say that sometimes I'm more concerned about telling the truth than reading emotions. So the classic example, which has never really happened, right? But like if somebody said, "Isn't my baby cute?" And I was like, "Well, actually, it's pretty ugly." I mean, you want to strike a balance between truth and I guess being emotionally connected with people to a point where like you care. I've wondered often, like, am I devoid of emotional like connection? But no, I'm not, because I can watch a commercial and cry like a little baby when I hear Stephen Hawking, narrating a Google commercial about the stars, and I'm just like, "Ugh." So obviously not. But I think, yeah, I think I probably need to work on connecting with people and reading and thinking ahead about how they might take something I say, which I've been working on for a long time. But
Do you think that maybe a way to get around that is parables? Because when you're trying to communicate truth to somebody, maybe veiling it in a certain way would prevent any, I don't know, bad emotions from arising up in them?
it's a great question, Bill. And I think giving an allegory is a really exceptional way to convey truth because it leads people into like realms of self-discovery. And maybe then if there's an ugly truth to be revealed, you've done it yourself about yourself. I'm sure that there have been times where I've said something and, Scott or my wife have said something like, oh, isn't it interesting that so-and-so did this thing? And I think, oh, I've done that thing. Maybe, or, I mean, that's a practical example, but delivering something as an allegory or a story, it leads somebody to self-discovery. It means probably more to tell somebody, 2 plus 2 is 4. And then like you have to understand the context of numbers and understand how they work before you can just tell them the answer to something, right? Like, I guess use mathematics as a basis. Like, you don't just tell somebody, you don't start teaching multiplication without teaching subtraction and addition first. So in this case, I would use subtraction and addition or whatever, preceding math concept as the idea of the allegory, kind of telling how something works and the machine works, or a story about how that works, so that by the time they get to the concept, they are able to conceptualize it and understand it, rather than you just saying, you have an ugly baby.
Oh, yeah. I learned through allegory. I speak to people in allegory a lot when I'm describing things, because I can give you the whole idea through other things that you understand already and how they relate. So, we all understand these things. This is how it connects, and it clicks. I get it. Otherwise, I'm reading you like, I don't know, like a research paper, a document, a bullet point of how it happens. And I'm like, look, I need to use the IKEA catalog of life, because that's how I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, right. That's a perfect way to put that. I mean, I think about, this kind of ties back to that idea, the first question you asked, which was best advice I ever got. And when I think about best advice I ever got and being able to, it ties into the idea of allegory. So I guess maybe some of the best advice I ever got was contained in Masonic ritual, as weird as that might be. Which was interesting because Bill, as a fraternity brother, mentioned this idea of allegory that comes up, and that really doesn't come up much, I don't think, outside in the the profane world of non philosophical thinkers or people who have been through some sort of ritual, or people who might be into really thinking and experiencing life.
What was the most embarrassing or humbling experience of your life?
Man, I'm really like an open person, so I don't really find anything embarrassing or humbling. Humbling, sure. Like, there have been times where I've put my foot in my mouth, I think. I'm 38, and I think back to probably one of the most embarrassing things. I probably never told this story before, but like publicly. I was in third grade, and I was living in Naples, Italy. My stepdad was in the service, and my best friend at the time is a guy named Jerry. Jerry was in 4th grade and I was in 3rd grade. And he and I were playing Frisbee with a couple other kids. And so the Frisbee skips off the ground and Jerry snags it. And so Jerry is an African American and his dad works with my dad. And Jerry lived at the top of the hill and I lived at the bottom of the hill. And when Jerry snagged it, I used the N-word with Jerry. I said, "You blank." And I didn't know what that meant. You know, I was in 3rd grade. I heard kids say it on the playground. I had no context for it. I just thought it was like, "You dork." And weeks went by. And I remember sitting in my room and I saw Jerry's dad walking down the hill, coming toward my house. And these are like little Italian villas. We didn't live on base. So it's like top of the hill, and there's this kind of road that curves and comes down. And I could see Jerry's dad coming. I was like, "Oh, what's that about?" Then I hear my dad, "Robert, kitchen now." I went in the kitchen. And "What's up, Dad?" "Did you use that word with Jerry?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know what that means?" "No, I think you do." But my dad really thought I knew what it meant. You know, I just didn't know. And he told me about it, and I was so like mortified and apologetic and embarrassed. It took like a couple days to walk, get the gall to walk up to Jerry at his house and apologize, like in front of his dad and his mom and his sister. And that was probably like just the worst thing in the world to me, because I know, especially thinking about it in the scope and in a realm of objective lens of today, where this kind of language and everything is so polarized, and we have movements across the USA that are just at head, right? And in my house, I've got 4 kids who never have heard me say any kind of thing like that because I'm so against it. And I don't know. I think that was probably, the most embarrassing, humbling experience of my life, because I think not only was it a lesson in ignorance.
Well, yeah, you're
Like
how
I
old?
knew,
How do you
but
how do you, if nobody gave you that information, then you're not going to
sure,
know.
yeah,
You don't have the brain capacity to figure that out. It's almost sad that nobody said like, "Hey, man, a couple words you probably shouldn't say."
right, yeah, exactly.
And there's really
And
only
so
a couple at that age. Like you could list them on 2 hands.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I feel like not knowing and then saying that to Jerry, like it was also like so hurtful, right? Like I
Yeah.
hurt my best friend like so deeply. So yeah, I mean that was definitely probably the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me. I remember weeks later, I see Jerry's dad walking again down the street, and I thought, "Oh shit, what did I do?"
Yeah.
And I freaked out. And then Jerry's dad left. I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess we're cool." Like, Jerry's dad just came over for coffee. Like our dads were totally, they worked together and they loved each other like brothers. And I love Jerry. He was like he was my best friend for years, the whole time we were in Italy. And yeah, it was just a bummer. And I was always still embarrassed of the story. And
Well, you
it's
shouldn't
just,
be. I mean, it's
well,
like you said, it's a lesson in ignorance and what can happen from it. But
yeah.
you weren't given the tools, and it obviously through nobody's fault. But you didn't have that key bit of information. Look,
Well,
and you just said
living
dork,
in
right? What is that, like a whale penis or something? So I mean,
right. Well, like if I'm also in Italy too, so at the time, this is not like part of the vernacular. I just hear it on
yeah,
the schoolyard because it's what kids on the base say. It's like, oh, okay. It was just really awkward and terrible.
Well, hopefully
But
you've been able to
worse for
spin it for the
Jerry.
positive. Well, yeah.
Because here I am, like we're best friends, and I say some garbage like that, and for like 2 weeks, he doesn't, like, we're not like close or whatever. And I'm thinking, what did I do? So it had to be
Well,
even worse.
Yeah, it's the weird power of words where sometimes, the meaning has already been defined before the intent has any implication. What is your greatest fear? How did you overcome it?
I think my greatest fear, like in a practical world, is probably heights. But I think if we're thinking a little bit more deep here, the idea is probably still this idea of transition, death. I think, as somebody who has anxiety, and then, is on the plus, highly productive anxiety, and then depression at times. I think the idea of death is really scary still, even though I felt like I've had near death experiences, and my own personal belief about death in a transition of sorts. I mean, even thinking about ideas of physics, thermodynamics says that nothing leaves; it changes shape, right? So if you can measure the soul, or if you can measure consciousness, then it also can't go anywhere. So what's there to be scared of? But it's the great unknown. And I'm always kind of going back. It's Indiana Jones, right? Ohan gets shot or whatever, and he says, "It's the last great adventure. I go first." He's excited to cross the veil, and I think that's probably still my greatest fear, because I think it's what drives my anxiety at times. So not overcome by any means.
What quality do you most admire in a man, and why?
I think there's a large umbrella there. That's probably like the idea of transparency. Transparency to know whether somebody is, where they stand. Do they stand for what I would? And it's really subjective of me to apply a way of correct action to a person. Like I would never. But well, let me rephrase that. I think there is a right way to do things, and I think there's a wrong way to do things that can be clearly defined. And I think knowing where somebody is, there's a transparency that they have. So, if I know that they're an honest person, and that they have integrity, I can see that if they're transparent about stuff. I'm a very transparent person. I mean, like, I'll answer any question, no matter how embarrassing it is, because I feel like I'm just a human, and if you want to make fun of it, then that's your immature, thing, right? Like everybody has faults. So, I think just honesty and integrity, because I think it leads to good relationships and openness and connection, and being able to love your fellow man for really who they are, honestly.
It's funny, since we've been talking about this interconnectedness. I love that answer, because the more I think about this question in doing shows, when I think of truth, if everybody was honest with each other, which is just openness and trying to not hide things, you wouldn't have, the dangerous products, the products that are dangerous to the environment, the persistent chemicals and the pesticides, because people would be broad spectrum informed or have knowledge of it. You would have a vested interest, and things are hidden and changed, and agencies are bought off. And if truth was just part of who we were, to me, it changes the entire world. Like it remakes it. And so I don't know, that to me, it's like, if there was one thing I could give the world, it would just be everyone is just open and truthful.
It really would change a lot of things. I mean, if we think about the modern I say the modern, but it's modern in
Yeah.
terms of the last 100 years or so, political ideologies. And I think when there's so much contained within the idea of unpacking rhetoric in a way that allows you to see through things. Like a classic example would be in the 1980s, a Republican Party would say, now I'm not picking a political spectrum here. I'm just using this as an example, but popular Republican candidates in the 1980s and even in the 90s would use the word, or the words family values, because that was intrinsically understood in a religious right kind of way as non-homosexuality. And so there's a whole language about, in terms of politics, that is not open and honest the way it should be. Because if people said really what they meant, would they get the support that they get? And I think, no, I don't think they would.
Yeah, I like that.
Especially when it comes to politics. I think this is a quote from somebody, so if it is, I don't know who to attribute to, but it was something like something along the lines of politics isn't reality. Politics is perception. So when we're talking about being truthful, I just think that, yeah, I mean, how much easier would it be to move throughout this world if you didn't have to think about, well, what's the agenda behind this piece of information that's in front of me?
Tangentially, Mark Twain, Sam Clemens said, tell the truth all the time, so you don't have to remember who you lied to, or what the lie was.
Well, it's such a sad zapping of power, because if you think about all the things we do, it's crabs in a bucket, people just controlling and, obfuscating from other groups to climb this pile. It's like, if we had that all focused forward, I mean, we would have conquered the universe or something. Like it's crazy when I conceptualize it.
But see, the thing is like guys like us, guys who might value this idea of honesty or whatever, maybe we're naive.
It's possible, because the truth of the universe, it doesn't have to be our ideal.
Right. I mean, there's a naivete that comes in place because there's always something, that has to drive human behavior, because somebody wants to be one step taller on the ladder. Somebody wants to have one more dollar, because somebody always, it's just human nature to want to be better than, or to rise to the occasion.
And you have to, that's evolution.
It is. It's just kind of built in. It's why we see, what we call brain drain in communist or 100% socialist countries. Whether we're into socialism or not, I think that the benefit of a future economy, the future is a true mixed economy of socialism and capitalism. But not what I would consider the Starbucks CEO when he said compassionate capitalism. I think that's bullshit. But
yeah,
but I think I think there's something to be said for a society that actually cares enough about its humans and about its animals and plants and everything else, that it ensures a quality of life across the board for everybody. And it's going to start with honesty about your reasons for doing things. Your motives. What is your motive here? Well, I want to make $1. And here's how what if we just said that? I have this thing. I want to make some money. I've got this idea. I would like it to sell it to you. Do you want to buy this thing? Because my motivation is purely money, but it's also a thing you want. So what if we did that instead of just said, let me just hide my motives, and sell you a product.
That's well, our values are skewed. The value is on this thing that is just agreed upon behind us. Money, it's only valuable if we agree it has value, and it's not keep the grass beautiful and the food fresh and the environment clean. It's how do I get more of this? If I think about this daily of what tool could be used to replace the monetary system to refocus, or what new system or new idea don't we have yet that's going to revolution? Because I think of religion as in like economy and governments. They fall apart after time because evolution is still happening, and there needs to be something new to, because it can't work the same.
Well, world economies, I mean, if you think about the way everything is working, we have, like you said, money is worth something because we say it's worth something. And the money is backed up by bonds. And those bonds are either bought back by the Fed or pushed out by the Fed in order to increase or decrease the amount of worth of a dollar. In some respect, it really is not worth anything. I think Nixon's the one who called it worthless and floating paper. But this idea of how do we move forward, but also, we're dumb humans, and the idea could be, there may be an answer, but like in an evolutionary sense, we are literally too stupid to conceptualize it. Now, people say conceptualize nothingness, and we can't. But maybe we can't because we're dumb, or we just don't have that way to think. It's not built into us. Does dogs don't have a concept of linear time. So maybe that's our kryptonite, right? Like we don't have the ability to, or the foresight to even think about what it could be in the future.
Love it. What are you most curious about?
It's definitely life and reality. I mean, the who, what, and where. Thinking about physics, and we have these ideas in physics that are concrete ideas that are replicable in laboratories, and we can see how stuff is. And then we see how these same things line up with religious and philosophical concepts, and then you start to see science and religion as two roads leading to the same place, or maybe mathematics and physics is actually a physical or mental way of conceptualizing the observable nature. So, is it Werner Heisenberg? Werner Heisenberg, Nobel Prize winner in physics. He said something to the effect of, we can't measure the things that we measure. We're actually just kind of arbitrarily measuring them based on our observation of them. It leads to this whole question of reality. What's real? What isn't? Then you think about, maybe the Beatles or something, right? Strawberry Fields, nothing is real.
Yeah. Well, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just to say, like, that's really one of my driving things. Every day is I'm always reading and thinking and worrying. Am I not understanding this? Are we doing it right? Are humans doing this thing right? Are we not experiencing? What is it? It's just life and reality. It's trying to figure it out. But I guess that's age old. The age old questions. That's really what drives me.
One of the most exciting things in that realm that gets me is the measurement of the speed of light. It's constantly been changing since we've been measuring it, and it's always, well, they were doing it wrong. They made the wrong assumptions. And I go, okay, but what if it's actually changing? Well, now we're in a whole different evolutionary world where even physics, the world around us is changing, and then anything's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it went from 186,000 to 186,282 to, depending on the medium you use. There was a book written, Faster Than the Speed of Light, in which they recorded the speed of light. They fired a molecule or an atom or something in water, and it traveled faster than it did in a vacuum. So this blew up this idea of a fixed speed. It's perception based, man.
Yeah.
It's like Einstein, it's the famous cows getting electrocuted. you have this dream. What would we see, and who would get electrocuted first, and what would be the observable reaction of a cow as it got shocked down the line? You know, just wild.
Something that I've observed, and maybe you have too, is that as the more advanced science gets, it kind of seems like the answers that they are offering us kind of fall in line with what's been written in the oldest texts that we're familiar with. Like case in point, like you were talking about sound. Well, that's frequency, and if you think of everything as frequency, and frequency is motion. So, what's the fastest thing what moves faster than the speed of light? Well, some people would say, well, that's not sound. But if we trace it back to Genesis, God spoke and then there was light. So we have sound and then light in Genesis, and then before that you had to think of it. So it's thought, sound, and then light, and that's like kind of like the progression of matter, so to speak. And I think that modern science, the more that we delve into these things and kind of try to dissect them from a scientific quote unquote standpoint, we're constantly being brought back to these these old sayings like as above so below and whatnot. Is that something that you've noticed?
Oh yeah, Bill. I mean, that's my whole wheelhouse. I mean, I think about that all the time. Is the idea of God created the universe with the use of the word. What if the word was a real, literal, guttural sound? In the Zohar, this ancient Jewish text in the Zohar, it says God creates all things from the hard spark. A hard spark, is that like the Big Bang? What the hell's going on here, right? Like you can look at the expansion of light over time in the universe, and you can I say almost, you have to use some creative imagination. You can tip the tree of life on one end, and you've got this kind of these different spheres of light, these Sephiroth, right? You've got the kingdom, or Keter at the top, and Malkuth, this idea of the kingdom material world, spreading out. And like, is that legit? Are they explaining the same concepts, and we're just kind of discovering it two different ways? It's really bizarre. I know, Adam, earlier you said something about the idea of the past informing the present and vice versa. And this is huge, and something we have today called Emergent Theory, where they talk about this huge, a multi-dimensional crystalline structure that gets reflected from something, and then projected down to 3 dimensions that we all live in, and that they measure this stuff in Planck time, and
that's a beautiful algorithm. Yeah, well, Planck time's weird because it's definitive points that are baked into reality, and then you're going, well, what is that? Because everything else is arbitrary in perception, but that's like a core, like, this is the system.
It's this, it's Legos, the system.
Well, it's funny, when I think about these concepts, I've always thought about it's just the relationship between things. Space, distance, quantum, how things are getting entangled. It's literally like, even in relationships, this conversation we're having, it's existing between us, because you have an idea of the words and the thoughts and what they mean, and I have an idea of them. And then we come together and we have this conversation, and there's this thing in between us that's completely separate, that's an agreed upon between our two thoughts and our minds. And I don't know, it gets me down this whole idea that ultimately, it could be like the single electron theory or proton theory, to me, has a beautiful thing about it, because it ends up being, it's just how close we are, how long, how many times we've progressed down the same path, the way our thoughts are connected, the information. And so, yeah, that's why the Planck level, to me, it's like one of my number one mysteries. Like, if I could just figure out what that is, it seems like it would be like the key. It's probably not, it's probably like, the first door into like the Manchester Mystery House.
Yeah, but I mean, we won't know unless we ask those questions. And I think the more people who get into the sciences that are open to these things. Now, I was recently at a lecture where one of the speakers said something along the lines. It was kind of decrying the idea a little bit of an America, of a world that rejects religion, but is highly, quote unquote, spiritual. And I kind of identify with that. Is this idea, I'm a very spiritual person, very connected to my friends, my family, and humans, and nature, and I see, so much love in the world, and all these things, right? But I don't attend a church. I don't subscribe to a particular religion, and I think I don't like it when people like kind of take a crap on this idea, because this is the mentality, I think, understanding and being open to this connectedness that we have, and then asking those questions that are pertinent in science. And then also, you're working and you're chugging along. You're doing the formulas and you're bringing out the answers and you're helping, understand sciences and solving problems. But at the same time, you're still open to some stuff. And anybody who says like, well, that's garbage, every single greatest physicist became a philosopher.
Yes.
All of them.
Yeah.
Every mathematician who was ever great was also a philosopher. A lot of them committed suicide. Like, there is danger in trying to wrap your brain around this stuff. But it's just the great mystery, like, think about, if Schrodinger's cat's real, and I said it is, that means if the Big Bang happened, something had to observe the Big Bang happening for it to actually have been a thing. So what the hell saw the Big Bang? I mean, these are just thought experiments. Listeners, take it or leave it.
Yeah, no, I love it. People tend to think of, religion as being things, but I'm like, well, what if reality is much more personal and religion is much more personal? Then, do you need to be part of the big group? There's some ideas and base rules and ways to interface with this reality that seem to be beneficial, and they seem to be baked into a lot of realities. So, yeah, I think of it this way. If I happen to be the last person alive, then, am I going to be Catholic? You know what I mean? Like, or I think I just would find it like reality would be something completely different. And I often wonder, it'd be interesting to see if your reality would morph, because there'd be no conceptions at that point.
Yeah, right. No other. Objective truth is a fallacy, is what we say, right? Everything is subjective, and then the most objectionable anything can ever be is a group opinion, and this forms, the morality of society or whatever. But yeah, if you're Vincent Price, the last man on earth, what's that look like? What's immoral? What's moral? What's right? What's wrong? What's real? What's not? Charles W. Ledbetter, not a huge fan, by the way, but one of the things that you find in his journal entries and some of the things the late great Greg Tillett wrote in his biography of Charles W. Ledbetter was that he lived by an idea of acknowledging his imagination as a reality. And this would be true for you if you were the last, maybe.
Who were or are your role models, and why?
Growing up, I thought my role model was going to be typically what most kids have, I think, over the last maybe 50, 60 years, some sports star, some movie star. My mom growing up, she was a television child. So growing up, her idol was Doris Day. My mom to this day runs the largest Doris Day fan club on Facebook there is.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It's pretty wild, and I encourage that. I think it's awesome. There's the super fans. Growing up, I knew a lot about Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I thought he was the coolest. He's this massive bodybuilder who came over. He did military time, and came over, and then when I went to college, he was the champion who made my college like affordable, and like all these things. Like, it was just amazing. But I think, as a man and somebody who studies some of the, I don't know, more interesting things in terms of science, somebody I think is uh, like David Bowen is definitely one of my favorite physicists, somebody that I look up to. And he obviously has passed away, but he's he wasn't afraid to challenge status quo and to bring forth questions, no matter how absurd they were, and to go to great lengths to get answers, even though they were detrimental to his career. And in his later years, he actually sat on a board of the Krishnamurti school, where he and Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was in the early 20th century, was supposed to be this, Revelation New World teacher from the Theosophical Society. Again, not a society that I follow or anything like that. I just find the persona of Krishnamurti fascinating. And when Krishnamurti had been asked, "Why did you put David Bohm, a physicist, on your board?" and he says, "Because David Bohm asks me the questions that nobody else asks, and he can pull out these amazing, dialogues that the students of Krishnamurti would study, but he couldn't just say these things. Somebody had to interview him for him to pull these great things out." Again, a physicist. And then I think about people who paved the way, and I think about powerful people in history. And I remember as a young kid, one of the first books my dad got me, my stepdad anyway, was a book on ancient Egypt. And I remember reading about this Egyptian queen, Hatshepsut, and she's like the first, I don't even want to call it feminist, but this woman like takes over Egypt, and like, I mean, she's just the boss. And I always thought how awesome it was that she didn't take any crap, and she led the country, and she made it no mistake that she was Pharaoh. It was really kind of awesome, and I thought, that's just the coolest. And so even today, when I'm such a big, I've been called a raging feminist before, right? Because I don't know. I believe in that. I believe in my wife and all of her friends and all the women in the world to be able to do all the great things they want to do and do whatever they want to do. And so when I think back about the kind of that powerhouse, those are probably two really cool people that I really looked up to. I also really looked up to Mae Jepsen, who is she was the first African American woman astronaut, and she's still doing amazing things today. And yeah, those are probably some people I think that I would look up to, and that I'm always, they're not like these icons that I have posters on my wall, but they are people that I read about probably once a week, or that I relate past life experiences to, and I say, "Oh man, I remember this one time I read about Mae Jepsen did this," or or David Bohm was talking about this thing. They're people that I constantly refer back to as ideal people who have lived, that we have a clear record of. I mean, maybe not so much Hatshepsut, but I mean, ancient Egypt. What are you going to do?
What institution of society or structural aspect of modern life would you change given the chance?
That's really rough, because we think we're always doing great. I often wonder, you think about antiquity and how we learned. I was reading an article maybe a month or two ago, and I'm probably going to get these years wrong, but it was something like 65,000-year-old tooth we found in a cave, and the DNA came back as Homo sapien sapien. So, like, This is a modern anatomical human being living 65,000 years ago. I mean, this is incredible.
Uh-huh.
And the idea, though, is like 200 years ago, Horace Mann came over here and changed school for everybody. And before this, we've got this idea of apprenticeships and liberal arts and sciences, and perhaps kids who could go outside and they could tell you, what sign the sun is rising in, or just things about the natural world we live in that kids today can't do. And I think I came across this idea because not that I don't like modern school or the public education system. I think the public education system is probably the foundation of so much, but I wonder sometimes about how we teach. Like, is there a value in acknowledging some of the past several thousand years, the way we did things and the great thinkers of the past, and then we think about today and we go, who are great thinkers today? I mean, is it Bill Gates, or is it this person? Or we think about Thomas Aquinas or Plato or Iamblichus or Philo Judaeus, these kind of people who are just crazy thinkers in Neoplatonic thought, and really, like, Neoplatonism forms the basis of almost every religion afterward.
Mm-hmm.
or and I just wonder, like, in terms of critical thinking, maybe I would change a little bit the way school works, or offer some more natural, liberal, quote unquote, educational foundation in formative years with kids. I think we're starting to maybe get there a little bit with some of the more open and accepting ideas of art, the arts, and expression, and being cool with how kids express themselves and things. I don't know if I answered that question, but
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
What is the most courageous thing you have ever done in your life, or that you have seen?
Wow. I don't know that I've ever done anything truly courageous. I think I've maybe stood up for somebody or some people when they were getting the short stick, and subsequently I was reprimanded for it in the organization that I did this in, which led to, like, wild rumors within the organization of why I was demoted from a position or whatever. Things that had to do with like upright conduct, and letting people know that a person in the organization was like a sex offender, and that they shouldn't be allowed to be employed in the way they were working with kids. And so this was years ago. And so I think I did a courageous thing by bringing this up to powers that be, but to my detriment, right? Like, that person is been removed and censured, but in my case, I was also, like, demoted because it caused a problem.
So you did the right thing. Well, that's
And I got the shaft for it, right? Like, nice guys finish last. But at the end of the day, I can go to bed with a clear conscience. Right? It's the old idea that looking the other way is the same as doing nothing, or advocating for to do nothing. To know and do nothing is is advocating for.
Yeah, in my mind, it's very selfish because it's a burden. Yeah. I think about it. I don't even have to go religious. I go, there's something about intrinsically, I know this is wrong. And so there's a negative feeling. It's kind of what's beautiful. Those things are truth. Like, to me, that's truth. Right. I can't define it, but that's truth. And I know it. And if I don't follow it, my existence is miserable. And it's altruistic if there has to be a word.
Yeah. And, you know, altruism is something that we all strive toward, but is like absolutely unattainable, because the most, in my mind, right, the most altruistic thing you could do is to like make zero impact, which would be to not exist.
Yeah.
But you do exist, so you got to do the best you can with what you got while you're here.
Don't breathe. You're killing dust mites.
I mean, you know, to an extent, but yeah, you're right. I mean, you cannot look the other way when things like that, and many other things, you know, I don't want to just say X, Y, Z defines how you should act, but you know, there was a risk if I did something, and whatever happened to me is still not as bad as what could happen had I not done something. So, I mean, I can't really say more about it because it's a legal issue, but there you go.
No, I absolutely love that, because if everybody did that, imagine how beautiful the world would be. You know, there wouldn't be Epsteins out there. It would not be a possibility.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
That's a challenging question, but there's probably an opportunity, as with any challenge, to be honest, right? I think to be a man today, I don't like the word. I don't like the word toxic masculinity. I think being masculine is not necessarily toxic. What's toxic is the hyper aggression that is normalized, maybe, or uh, the constant pressure or normalizing of hypersexuality, all of these things that I think can be somewhat dangerous to the development of a man. When I think about manhood today, I'm like really intrigued by the ideas of classic thinkers. People like maybe you think about, you know, the most powerful man in the world would be the most masculine. And you think about Alexander the Great. Well, Alexander the Great was a classic warrior poet. He was bisexual. He loved both men and women, and was the greatest conqueror on the face of the planet. Feared and loved. Who promoted ideas like Stoicism. The journey is the way, right? The mountain is the path. And I think if men today could be more comfortable around women, around their counterparts, around kids, to show that you can have emotions, right? It's not feminine to have an emotion. Like my kids, you know, and kids to a point, right? Like they might not understand why you might shed a tear at the end of Master and Commander, right?
Right.
But I'm bawling my eyes out at the end of that movie. Or I mean, you name some emotional thing in a movie. I mean, I still can't watch Bambi. It's a stupid cartoon. But at the same time, I just think like, oh man, what if I watch my mom get shot? I mean, there's just healthy to drive the idea of healthy emotions within male society, but drive also home that you know, there's nothing wrong with being present and connected and enjoying presence of friends and family and being emotional all of those things, while preserving this kind of kindness and teaching moments. I remember growing up, and nothing against my grandfather, but if I asked my grandfather, can I go with you to, he was an electrical engineer, can I go with you to Radio Shack while you get these parts and watch you build a thing? No, get out of here. Okay. So what I learned from that was be stiff. Guys don't like kids or whatever, right? And then when I asked my dad, who was the drunk dad, I said, Dad, why do strawberries have the seeds on the outside? And he would stop talking to his buddy, take a swig of his beer, and look at me and go, that's a good question, son. And then turn back to his friend and start drinking beer again. Like, what does it mean to be a man? Like, when my kids come up to me and ask me a question like that, I stop what I'm doing, if I can, and we go to the internet and we find out. Or, we give the time of day to the kids and we teach them about what it means to be a positive male role model and to have a code of ethics, a code of morals. And there's so much, I think, today that's coming back into that. And maybe it's millennialism or the Gen X or the generations that come afterwards. I think there's kind of like socioeconomic factors in terms of descriptors, or I think people today are just more in tune with creativity and quality and paying attention and experiencing things. So being a man today, I think is maybe presence and being comfortable, healthy in an emotional way. And this just comes from the idea that when we look at the past, 50 or 60 years, masculinity is, boys don't cry, and you got your white t-shirt and jeans on, and you're working on mechanic cars, and you're doing X, Y, Z. And I have no problem telling you, the last time I worked on a car, I set the damn thing on fire. So does that mean I'm not a man? I think just maybe there's an element of honesty that should drive that. I don't know. A good question. I just don't have a solid answer, probably.
Well, Robert, that was the end of the first set of questions on 13 questions. You ready for the bonus round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sweet. What rule do you have for yourself that you never break, and why do you think that is important?
I think the rule that I never break for myself is not to limit myself. Like, don't limit the way I think about it.
Why is one man rich and another man poor? Why we ain't satisfied? Why we gotta have more? Why your suicide rates on the rest so high? Why I tell you the truth but you say don't lie? Why is being a good father at an all-time low? Why is it acceptable? Yo, why? I don't know. Why she blame him and he blame her? It's useless. Ask yourself this question. Why you making excuses? Why do parents gotta bury their kids? Why we text and drive, not caring how scary it is? Why it's so hard to forgive and leave the past behind? And if you did, then that's divine. Why don't you help your brother when you see him fall? Why do we act like God don't see it all? Why do we call them black, them white, them Asians, and use labels? Now that's racism. I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? I don't wanna Hawaii. question what all of it means, and why won't you follow your dreams? Tell me why, the night when you took my dad, why'd you let me see my grandpa cry? And tell me why, and why do you choose to hide, even though you was born to fly? And tell me why, and why don't we turn from all the hate? And why don't we learn from all mistakes? Why do I keep on wrecking these fat beats, and teachers don't make more than professional athletes? And why, and why, and why, and why, and why, and why?
I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. I don't wanna hold it. Why?
This should be considered entertainment and not therapy. We hope you benefit from our resources available at 13questionspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.